Hello everyone, my name's Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today we're going to be looking at three things. Why people read horror, what kind of people are normally attracted to horror, and what kind of things can we learn, life lessons from reading horror. Please stay tuned. Okay everyone, before we start, I just want to say that remember that this is a combination of my own research into these topics as well as mainly my own personal feelings. And I think that's important to differentiate, because when I researched some of these things there was a lot of contradiction online, and I really just want to state how I feel and what I think is correct for me in terms of reading horror. Okay, first of all, why do I read horror, or why do people in general read horror? I think a common definition is that horror is about terrifying you, horrifying you, and to a certain extent disgusting you. But I think it reaches far beyond that. I think it is thrilling. I think it touches portions of your brain and your neurons, and it is a pretty extreme sensation. And I think people that enjoy those extreme sensations are going to be attracted to reading horror. Okay, second of all, and remember this is just an introduction, what kind of people read horror? Now, as I said, I did quite a bit of research and I looked for answers in terms of extrovert, introverted kind of people, and really it was so contradictory in terms of a lot of papers, a lot of studies. Some studies show that introverted people do not prefer horror, and it's more extroverted people. However, I feel that I am very introverted. I am pretty shy. I'm also very sensitive, and I suffer quite a bit from anxiety, but I'll come to that later on in the video. And I love horror. So for me personally, I think that sensitivity and just makes you a little bit more susceptible to reading this kind of fiction and to be searching for something more extreme to touch you and to move you. Okay, now we're going to look at 5 life lessons that we can learn from reading horror. First of all, and I think this is the most important one, courage. Having courage and being able to face your fears and being able to bring those monsters and that fear out in the open to basically wipe it away and see it for what it really is. And I think there are way too many people that repress their emotions, repress their fear. And I think this is a real problem. I don't think that is healthy. And I think people that are sensitive, and I think people that are readers of horror are able to bring out that fear, to face it. And that gives you courage, because that spills over into real life, and you're more likely to be able to face fears of the real world and what's happening around you, because you've faced these monsters in the horror novel. And now it's also, if you think about back to the pandemic, the world was full of fear of the unknown, of what was happening. And people were still reading things like The Stand by Stephen King. And I just think that is very cathartic. You're able to deal with this thing better because you read stuff like that that's darker. Okay, I've chosen 2 books to try and illustrate my point. The first one is Richard Lehman, Funland. Now, as you know, I love carnivals, and carnivals are creepy, and whenever you read about a creepy carnival, there is a lot of fear and anxiety. And I think it's important, even when you visit a carnival, going into a horror house and coming out and being brave and courageous. You feel good about yourself having been able to do that and to face those fears. So that is Funland, first of all. Second of all, I think we have the most powerful book that explores the idea of courage and love, and that is It by Stephen King, where basically you join these losers in the Losers Club, and they have to face a living nightmare, a terrible evil. They have to band together, and they have to find the courage and the love together to be able to face off against this evil. So I really think this is an excellent example of courage. Okay, the second point I'm going to make, the second life lesson from reading horror, is that you discover empathy and compassion for your fellow human beings. If you're reading a book that is full of pain and suffering, that people are experiencing extreme horror done upon them, I think, as opposed to what many people online are saying, I think you're going to develop more empathy and not less empathy. However, I do think, and this is true for this whole video, if there are certain things that you cannot cope with, if there are certain things that actually trigger you, then it's perhaps better not to read that type of horror, like animal abuse or whatever it is, or more extreme variations of horror. That might cause more anguish, that might actually traumatize you, as opposed to, and it might do the opposite effect of creating compassion and empathy. And I think it's important. I think some excellent examples of horror novels where there is a lot of pain inflicted on other people is serial killer novels. For example, Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs, and something by Michael Slade called Headhunter. Now, the terrible crimes that are inflicted upon these people, I think you get compassion and empathy for these victims. And I think that spills over into your own life, where you develop a sense of empathy for your fellow man, and especially for those that are less fortunate than you. I find that was the case with me when I read horror. I think about our country, I think about South Africa, and how many of the people are less fortunate than I am, and I'm able to empathize more with them because I read novels like this, even though that seems to be a contradiction. A second example is a novel that I didn't particularly enjoy because it involves bullying, and a very, very nasty novel, and that is Carrie by Stephen King. Now, you really feel for this character, and you really root for her, because throughout, I know the ending is just something spectacular, but we're not going to go there, but throughout her life at school, she is bullied mercilessly. And I really think that what happens in the end, they get their comeuppance, but yeah, that is Carrie, a poor soul that is horribly bullied. The third thing that I gain from reading horror fiction is that I start to appreciate history, cultural awareness, books that are set in different countries, and I do not think this is exactly the best example I could have chosen, and that is Song of Kali by Dan Simmons, because it misrepresents India in a bad way. But I just picked this up as an example. Any book that you read in a different country, in a different setting, with different cultures, you're going to learn something. And I always think it's important to branch out. I think most other fiction books, like the literary fiction, will deal with this topic a lot better. And there are a lot of books that I've read that are not horror, but I still think it's true to horror fiction as well. And I mean, you can read things that are about myths and legends, and a lot of folk horror tales. I think I brought up one the other day that really bring into this third thing as well, about cultural awareness, historical awareness. The fourth learning is that horror enriches the imagination. It changes the way that you think about the world, and it teaches you problem-solving skills. So, okay, let's go a little bit light-hearted here. If you are reading a zombie apocalypse book, then you are going to figure out ways to solve problems if something like this really does happen. Not necessarily with zombies, but if there's some kind of apocalypse. It's only true horror fans that are going to be able to cope with a situation like that. So, reading a book like World War Z or Wet Work is going to be beneficial to you simply because you have those problem-solving skills and you have that creativity and that imagination to be able to cope with things like that. I mean, somebody who doesn't read horror is not going to know that if you shoot a zombie in the head, they'll go down. But yeah, that's a big benefit about being a horror lover. Okay, finally we're going to talk about escapism. Now, I mentioned I really suffer from anxiety. It actually is a bit of a condition with me, and sometimes I feel like I just want to run away from the world, and so I have a very limited group in terms of love my wife, love my family, have a few friends, and I'm okay with that. But it took me a while to learn that that was okay. And horror is an escape into another world, and even if it's a dark, dangerous, terrifying world, it is something that resonates with me and in a way makes your problem seem less real. That time that you're in that world and reading about these extreme things, you get lost there and you forget about your own issues. And also when you finish reading a novel, a horror novel, and something that is very dark, there's almost a feeling of relief. It's almost a feeling that it's all okay now. It's like a cathartic experience. It's like you're almost being cleansed. You've almost been, renewed. And I think there's no better example of a novel that I read this year that is probably one of my favourite novels now of all time, and that is Dan Simmons' The Terror, which was a harrowing, really dark book, where there was a lot of human suffering. It goes to very dark places, and at the end of it I did feel like a kind of, it's better now, it's finished. Okay everyone, there's some life lessons to be learned from reading horror. Please let me know what you think. What do you think of my 5 things? And if there's anything you would like to add, please write down in the comments deep dark down below. And please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Take care of yourselves, keep those pages turning, and cheers.